season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. Close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run. To bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. To swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. There's something very pleasant and comfortable about that opening line, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. The alliteration of mists and mellow helps to create an atmosphere of softness, reinforced by the warmth of the maturing sun, again with that alliterative M sound. We've also got an alliterative link between fruitfulness and friend, and season and sun. And in line 3 we get conspiring, which forms a connection with close in the previous line, and bless, which picks up on the B sound of bosom, and then in line 4 the fr sound again, with that repetition of fruit. And then there's round and run. All this alliteration helps to reinforce the semantic connections between these words, creating quite a complex set of relationships. The season, autumn, is connected with the sun because they are friends, close friends, conspiring to produce fruit and fruitfulness. And it's notable that conspiring here is not something sinister, as the word usually suggests, but almost playful, as the season and the sun work together to create something good, to load and bless the world with ripe fruit. And the slight erotic overtones of bosom are balanced with spiritual well-being, expressed in that word bless. And then finally there's the R sound of the vines that round the thatch eaves run, developing the playful, light-hearted element hinted at by that word conspiring. So we've got a kind of network of connected words and ideas here, with the alliteration reinforcing the association between the autumn and the sun. The two of them good-humouredly working together to bring material and spiritual comfort to the world. What a positive picture. This material and spiritual comfort is intertwined with human life. The vines run round the thatch eaves, that is, round the roofs of the cottages where people live. There's a strong sense of the pastoral here, the idealised life of the country dweller. And, of course, running through all of these opening lines is the sense of fruition, conveyed through words like mellow and fruitful, maturing and load, leading up to the 6th line of the poem, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. But the poet's thoughts are leading in another direction, one that is ultimately less comforting, less ideal. The words swell and plump in the next line have a double edge to them. We start to feel that one can have too much of a good thing, and that idea becomes explicit as the poet talks of more and still more flowers for the bees, leading to the stanza's conclusion. Summer has o'erbrimmed, overfilled their clammy cells. The ripeness and the sweetness are too much, and that word clammy captures all the cloying sickness of ripeness turning overripe. So we begin with a season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, and we end with the clammy cells of bees. As so often in Keats's poetry, what appears to be an ideal world contains the seeds of its own contamination. Keats doesn't push this idea. He doesn't directly tell us where it'll all end, but he doesn't need to. He has very skillfully brought his readers to the point where it's obvious. At the height of its ripeness, the fruit will start to rot. The warm days will end, the bees will die, the season will move on. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spares the next swathe and all its twined flowers. And sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press, with patient look, thou watchest the last oozings hours by hours.
Every line of the first stanza is rich with vivid images of fullness and ripeness, with hints of overfullness and overripeness. By contrast, the first two lines of the second stanza are vague and impressionistic. Who hath not seen thee? Whoever seeks abroad? And the images, when they do come, are very different from those of the first stanza. In this second stanza, Keats focuses on autumn as a time not so much of ripeness as of reaping, of harvest. The settings, a granary, a field of half-cropped wheat, a gleaner picking up whatever's left after the main crop has been harvested, and the cider press, represent the process of cropping, of gathering the grains and fruits as they reach maturity. And central to all these scenes is the figure of a personified autumn, sitting on a granary floor, sleeping in a half-reaped furrow, keeping its head steady across a brook. Here one imagines a tree laden with fruit, or watching apples being squeezed in a cider press. This personification of autumn is perhaps the most striking feature of this stanza. In the granary, autumn is represented both as a human figure sitting on the floor, hair blowing in the wind, and as a sheaf of wheat being winnowed, that is, the grain being separated from the chaff. Autumn sleeping in the wheat field represents a pause in the process of cutting and reaping, but we are reminded of its hook and the inevitability of the harvest. The poorer inhabitants of the countryside would become gleaners in the autumn, picking up grain and fruit and so on that got left behind after the farmers had gathered their crops. And autumn is seen here both as a tree laden with fruit and as a gleaner watching for the chance to gather the leftover crops. And finally, autumn watches on as the juice oozes out of apples in a cider press. This personified autumn, with its hook, invokes the image of death with a scythe. But just as the first stanza merely hints that after ripeness and fruition come rottenness and decay without actually saying so, so in the second stanza the association between autumn and death is implied but not stated directly. The alliterated H, S and W sounds in the first 4 lines of the stanza seem to capture the quality of the wind, emphasised by the half-rhyme with find. There's a kind of dry, warm feeling about these lines. We know the wind is not rough or violent from the fact that autumn's hair is soft lifted by it as it goes about its work of winnowing, separating the chaff from the grain. So the comfortable feeling of the first stanza is continued into the second stanza, but in a different way, focusing on the harvesting, particularly the harvesting of grain, rather than on the fruition and ripeness of autumn. Once again, though, the poet hints at something less comfortable. Autumn may pause for a while, but in the end its hook will cut down every swathe of corn. Just as ripeness implies rottenness, so harvest implies death. And while the alliterated spares the next swathe depicts autumn in abeyance, it's a temporary reprieve, not an absolution. In the end, everything will be cut down. But Keats doesn't dwell on this. On the contrary, having hinted at it in the 6th and 7th lines of the stanza, he backs away from such thoughts, emphasizing instead the patience of autumn as it oversees the harvesting and storage of crops, with the word oozings giving just a hint of that sense of clammy ripeness that characterized the first stanza.
Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then, in a wailful choir, the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft, or sinking as the light wind lives or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now, with treble soft, the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies.
In this third and final stanza of the poem, Keats continues to praise autumn, focusing this time on the music of autumn. He starts by talking about the songs of spring, saying, "Think not of them." This is a rhetorical device, technically known as paralepsis, in which the speaker introduces a topic only to dismiss it. The effect, of course, is that we don't dismiss it in our minds at all. The whole point of paralepsis is actually to emphasize the point it purports to dismiss. So we have the songs of spring clearly in our minds, as Keats goes on to speak of the wailful choir as the small gnats mourn, followed by the bleating of the full-grown and therefore probably soon to be eaten lambs, the chirping of soon-to-die crickets, the rather plain song of the robin, symbol of the coming winter, and the harsh, tuneless twittering of the swallows as they flock together in preparation for migrating to warmer climes.
It is by any measure an unfavourable comparison. Keats doesn't enter into a description of the songs of spring. He doesn't need to. Just planting the idea of them in the reader's mind makes it clear that, by comparison, the sounds of autumn are by and large plaintive and reedy. All through this stanza, the positive and negative elements are interfused.
The word bloom is another reminder of spring, when flowers bloom, but here it's clouds, not flowers, that bloom. The word soft, too, seems gentle and positive, but it's counterbalanced by dying. And the rosy hue, positive enough in itself, is tempered in the context of the fields of stubble, the dead stalks of wheat left after the harvest. Even the wind is caught between living and dying. It's not that autumn doesn't have its music, its beauty, but there's a melancholy wistfulness to it, brought about by the knowledge that it'll give way to winter and death.
There's a tendency quite often for critics to emphasise the positive aspects of the poem, and there's no question but that it is written in praise of autumn and presents it in a positive light. At the same time, though, I feel a large part of the sense of beauty and peace of autumn, as Keats describes it, stems from the fact that it's temporary, a lull between the hot days of summer and the cold days of winter. It's precisely the transience of autumn that makes its beauty so poignant and gives it its special appeal. If we look outside the lines of the poem and consider the broader context of Keats's world, we get a rather similar impression. The poem itself is a kind of oasis in the broadly hostile landscape of Keats's life. During his walks through the countryside, there were, he wrote, two things which filled his thoughts: his love for Fanny Brawne, to whom he was formally engaged but too poor to marry, and his approaching death. Keats's medical training would have left him in little doubt about the outcome of his struggle with tuberculosis, and within 15 months of writing to Autumn, he was dead. In addition to these biographical details, some recent scholars, notably Richard McGrath Turley and Tom Paulin, have sought to emphasise the political landscape, the upheavals of the Peterloo massacre, the proliferation of government spies, and the exploitation of those who laboured on the land. I wouldn't go as far as they do in reading political messages into the text, but I think some understanding of the biographical and broader social background to the poem does help us to place it in perspective. Keats's world was one of tremendous hopes and idealism on the one hand, and a terrible sense of impending doom on the other, and an awareness of that can only enhance our appreciation of the depiction of autumn in this poem.